Welcome to the Tuesday edition of Juan's World, and because you can see my smiling face, you can reasonably deduce that I won't be cooking today. I did actually have something in mind and decided against it. I was going to do some deviled kidneys and talk about Victorian breakfast and so forth. But things have changed a little bit here in Cambodia. I went to the supermarket on Saturday, and wanted to buy a few things, including a little bit of brandy to add to my Christmas cake and Christmas puddings, which I mature for a year, and they need a little bit of feeding every so often. So I thought, well, I'll get a little bit of brandy. So I went to check out with my vegetables and odds and ends, and the cashier picked up the bottle of brandy and said, "Can't sell this." What? And she didn't speak any English, so I tried to talk to her in Khmer, and for some reason she just wouldn't talk to me. I mean, my Khmer is not great, but I was not being particularly obtuse, but she wouldn't say anything, and so a customer who was behind me, which is quite unusual because I was there at opening time, 8 in the morning, and there's usually no customers except me, but there was one guy there getting a liter of milk, and he said, no, the government stopped alcohol sales again. They did this several months ago when they had lockdown. They closed all the bars, the restaurants, the clubs and whatnot, and stopped people from congregating. And they have this policy when they do this, that you can't buy alcohol. They have this strange notion that if you buy alcohol, somehow or other it will lead you to congregating or something. I don't know what. But anyway, so that's when I learned that we're in a new series of lockdowns. Not in my area, but along the Thai border, because the Delta coronavirus variant is running wild, and they're pumping up the vaccines here pretty well. The statistics that come out of the government are not accurate. At one point they said that over 100% of the people in Phnom Penh were vaccinated. They probably meant over 10%. I think that would be close to the mark, but it said 100%, over 100%. Their plan is to have 13 million people fully vaccinated by the end of August, which is probably not going to happen, but maybe by the end of September. They might get closer to 10 million by the end of this month. And they're implementing all of these draconian measures to try to keep things under control. As it is, Cambodia is the best of all the Southeast Asian nations in terms of keeping things under control. And they are keeping a very good track of cases and whatnot. So all seems good. I still can't get a vaccine. Anyway, that just was a kind of a switch that just flipped in my mind on Saturday. Like, okay, I'm going to have to change things around. I'm finding that the people that I'm working with my writing are not communicating with me for one reason or other. One of the people that's working with me is currently with her husband's family in Morocco, and she's tied up, and I can't do anything on the book that I'm working with her. My son is now settled in the university town where he's going to be doing his PhD, and things are pretty much on track there. Everything seems to be ticking along, but there's not much for for me to do. And so, as a contrarian, I could say, well, so I'll do more videos, more blogs, more of everything. But I was looking at my YouTube channel, and I realized that it's right around 2 years ago this week that I started this channel. Haven't quite got 2 years worth of videos up yet, but very close to it. 208 would be two a week for 2 years. But this week is definitely the second anniversary. So happy birthday. And for the moment I'm going to quit. And I'm also going to quit posting my blogs on Facebook. I might still write a blog down again, as I have been doing for the past couple of years. I might still make a video now and again, but for the moment I'm just not going to do any of it. I'm just going to not exactly do nothing, but I'm going to do what pleases me at the moment. So let me just talk a little bit about where I'm going. I have 2 books under contract, and they're going along pretty well. My Fieldwork Methods book will almost certainly be out early next year, and I've just got to do a final revision with a colleague, and that'll be in by the end of this month. Wiley Blackwell has to make a final decision, but it seems like everything's going okay. They were a little worried because the reviewers thought that I was being a bit of an old git, and they wanted some exercises that would appeal more to younger students and a more diverse student body, and so on and so forth. And so I had to co-opt somebody to work with me, 2 people in fact. And we're pretty much on track, but the publisher has the final decision about whether to go forward, and it seems that they will. In speaking personally to the editors, it seems like it's all okay, but we just have to keep fingers crossed until the last minute. My book on Genesis is proceeding fine. The editor there is just slow as molasses in January, but that's fine. My book with Rutgers on everyday anthropology, I have no idea. The editor just vanished, just ghosting me. And for the moment, I'm just going to let that be. Can't be bothered doing more than just poking her once a month and saying, hey, I'm here, hey, remember me, you want to talk to me? And we'll see. If that doesn't pan out, I'll go back to the well with that. And what I've been thinking about doing for a very, very long time, has been sort of in the recesses of my mind, is hard to really pin down, but in a nutshell, I would say it is an attempt to answer the question, what does it mean to be English? Or something even more abstract like, what is England? And it's an anthropological question in some respects, it's a historical in some respects, it's geographical in some respects. It's a question that I've often asked myself from the perspective of whether there is something solid in terms of what we call culture. Like at the beginning of the 20th century, anthropologists would write books about the Nuer people, or the Tikapia, or the Meiring, and they thought that these small, somewhat isolated groups of people could be called a culture, and you could study their kinship, their trading habits, their language, rituals, marriage, religion, etc. And so for the first half of the 20th century, the pretty much rite of passage of everybody who wanted to become an anthropologist was to go to a university and take the relevant coursework, and then go off to a place for a year and study them, and then come back and write about them and say that this is my ethnography of the Mbuti, or the Zulu, or the Bantu, or whatever. And then the second half of the 20th century, anthropologists started saying, well, this idea that cultures are like bounded entities is really problematic. And it's problematic for two reasons. One of them is that some cultures are very complicated. And of course, the cultures where the anthropologists came from were complicated. England, France, Germany, United States, and not simple. Can you say there is such a thing as French culture, or English culture, or the culture of the United States? Well, if you don't live in those countries, it's not too difficult, because you don't have enough knowledge. But if you start talking about something like English culture, you end up thinking in stereotypes. But when you start thinking about the different regions of England, then you realize that there's so many differences. The differences in dialect, the dialect of Newcastle in the north, what's normally called Geordie, or from Liverpool, or from Birmingham, or East End of London, Cornwall. They're all very, very different. They have different habits of cooking, very great many regional specialties that are unique to one region or another. Housing style. And so when you start thinking about English culture, it just seems like a big tapestry. But yet there is something English about England. Like when they voted to leave the EU, really this was the UK, but you can divide the UK up into 4 countries, and England was one of those countries that voted very much in favor of leaving, because they had an image of what they wanted England to be. And people can distinctly say, I am English. I mean, you say, yeah, I'm also Brummie or Scouse or Geordie or whatever, but under it, I'm English. So, what is this Englishness? Now, the part that really I'm focusing on is that for a great part of the history of that geographic region, which now encompasses the nation of England, it was not a nation. It was a province of a much larger conglomeration. Like before Duke William came over from Normandy and conquered the conglomeration of Anglo-Saxons that were there, and Danes and whatever else. It had been a very fragmented region. Great parts of the east of England were controlled from Denmark. It was called Danelaw, and then the kingdoms that existed in the rest of what is now England had their own kings. They were separate. There was Mercia and Wessex and Essex and so forth. I mean, they were all very distinct. And then when William came and conquered it, it didn't suddenly become a unified nation as we think of nowadays. It was a province of his larger domain, which was Normandy. And so he was king of England and Duke of Normandy. He spent most of his time in Normandy. He didn't rule over England in the sense that, okay, I am now the king of England and I'm now going to live here and I'm going to work it into a whole country. No, it was a province, and it had been a province of Denmark. It had been a province of Rome at one point. And after William, England continued to be a province in a much larger area of what we now think of as France. And that the idea that France and England are different countries just didn't really resonate. That sometimes the nominal king of France and the nominal king of England fought over which parts belonged to which. The 100 Years' War, for example, was famous for the kings of England saying, no, France is ours. You know, so it went from the Duke of Normandy saying England belongs to Normandy, and then over the centuries, it turned around where the kings of England were saying, no, France belongs to us. And you've got all those many wars. The Henry V fought, Battle of Agincourt, for example, the Battle of Crécy, all manner of tussles between the continent of Europe and the island of England, or island of Britain really, with England on it. And you can't ever say until around the time of Queen Mary, you can't really say that England was an isolated nation. Queen Mary, of course, very famously, that is Henry VIII's daughter, famously lost the last holding of England in France, which was Calais. And it is supposedly said that when she died and they did an autopsy and opened her heart, Calais was printed on her heart. That was the last vestige of French holdings in England. But the turning point, in my estimation, was King John. And because of 19th century romances and of Robin Hood and Magna Carta and all that kind, like John is always conceived of as being like a horrible king, and his elder brother Richard the Lionheart was considered to be like the great king. So Robin Hood had to keep everything honest, and whilst Richard was off fighting in the Crusades, but he would come back and make England great again. Well, sort of like mega. But Richard spent almost no time in England. As far as he was concerned, England was just a province of his much larger holdings in France. He spent much more time in France. Duke William, William the Conqueror, spent most of his time in Normandy. John was the first king of England, the first whose native language was English. His brother, Richard, spoke French as his first language, and all the kings before that spoke French or Norman French, some versions of Old French. John spoke English, and mostly by default, he became King of England only because he lost a great deal of his holdings in France. He was known, his epithet was Lackland, John Lackland, because he didn't have the land that his predecessors did. And so this book that I'm working on is going to be a revisionist rethinking of what it is to be English and what it means for a place to be called England. And it's part of my general point of view in anthropology that is that things are always changing, that everything is always evolving. But we have a bad habit of taking the way things are now and projecting them back into a past where they don't belong. So we can't talk about the England of today, its boundaries, its ideology, its sense of self, as going any further back than the 19th century. When you start going back before that, then the mentality of what it means to be English, where England exists culturally, geographically, historically, it's just completely different. And so the book, when I get around to writing it, if I get around to writing it, will be something like, the title that I keep putting in my head is a Vera Lynn song, There'll Always Be an England. And it's an ironic title. It says, yeah, there'll always be an England, but it won't be what you think it is. I mean, it won't be what you think it is a generation from now. And it isn't what it was a generation ago. I don't know a lot about it because I haven't lived much of my life in England, which is why I can afford to write this kind of historical ethnography, because I'm an outsider. I'm not English. My mother was English, and her whole side of my family are English and have lived in England for generations, but I haven't. I've lived a very small part of my life, most of it as a teenager or as a young man in university, and then I left. So I am treating my study of England as an outsider, and I want to know why certain values get held up as being English when they're really not. Like just about everything that you point to as being English isn't. I mean, I was thinking the other day about Stonehenge. Like, you think about Stonehenge and you think, yeah, that's like really old. And it is located in what is now England, but it has nothing to do with Englishness. It was built thousands of years before England even was a speck in God's eye as a thought of a thought. It was built by people that we don't know much about. They certainly weren't English. And yet, if you go to Stonehenge, you still feel like there's something culturally English about it, because it just keeps going through historical time. It keeps being there, and it keeps representing something that is quintessentially English. Same with Avebury or the Rollright Stones or all kinds of monuments in England. So that's what I'm thinking about. And so I won't end by asking you to like and subscribe, because I'm not going to be doing this very much for the next little while. I don't know. I'll come back at some point and do some videos, and maybe do some cooking, just to amuse myself. But for now, I hope you're faring well. Hunker down. Let's survive this pandemic together, and I will see you at some point.